Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of speaking to some of the best marketing leaders around the globe. And I'm again streaming in here from San Francisco City. Very excited to have Kylee Swenson Gordon with me. Kylee is someone who has spent almost the last 12 and a half years at this company called Autodesk. Yeah, all of you know of it. Autodesk, who doesn't know of it, right? In the last role, that is what she's still a part of. She is the current head of content development and own media for Autodesk. Musician at heart, I should say. Writer by profession. Eventually now a content marketer. Kylee, welcome to the show.
Thank
you so
you.
much for agreeing to speak to us and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
Perfect. I think right chipping in, love to know about how this career evolved for you. And I think let me just quickly start with that. I've seen most of the content marketers I've hosted on the show. None of them have ever planned content marketing as a career. It's either accidental or it's by choice, but it happened on the way, right? I'd love to ask you where you grew up to how did you choose this career path? I think you went to Santa Clara University down south. I mean, I love to understand everything to what all it built up to where you are today.
Yeah, no problem. Yep. So I'm a Minnesotan. I came out to California, went to Santa Clara University, and I got my first job. This is going to date me a little bit, but out of a newspaper.
Uh-huh.
I was at a skateboard park with my roommate, and there was a newspaper, and there was an ad for an editorial assistant for Bass Player magazine. Okay. Now, I'm not a bass player, so ultimately I did not get that job. But they came back and asked if I wanted to be the editorial assistant for Keyboard magazine. So all of this is music. I am obsessed with music. I am a musician, and I've been in a touring and recording band myself. And so this was sort of a dream for me. Like, I got to interview Bjork and De La Soul and do all these really cool, interesting things. Then I went to Guitar Player magazine and, continued on as a music magazine editor, focusing a lot on music production, because I wanted to know, how did you use a sidechain compression to really give that kick drum some punch? I wanted to learn from the best. And then, this went on. This is like half my career. And then one day, my friend who was working for Avid, makers of Pro Tools, he asked me if I knew what content marketing was. This was in 2012. And at this point, he had moved to Autodesk.
You had no clue till then what content and marketing together.
No, I didn't. I had no idea. So he said, it's basically what you do, but it's for brands. And he, at first I was like, marketing? Is that for me? I don't know. Just because it wasn't really a huge part of my world. But he said, hey, look, if you hate it after a month and you just want to leave, we can still be friends. And I was like, wow, that's okay. That's kind. And then I stayed 12 and a half years. So clearly it worked out.
It worked out, right? And just also trying to understand, you worked at companies like Yahoo and then 12 and a half years at Autodesk, right? You've worked with some of the largest organizations in the world, right? At Yahoo, working for those organizations from an outside-in perspective, at Autodesk from an inside-out perspective, right? Just trying to understand, what does content marketing in these larger organizations look like? I'm pretty sure it's just not one. I mean, there's this entire part of brand journalism that these people do it well. By the way, Autodesk does it really, really well, the brand journalism part of things, right? I mean, I'm just trying to understand, one, what does content marketing in the organizations look like from a structural lens and roles of responsibilities? And second, how much of it is a small startup in a bigger organization, particularly effectively running like a small newsroom in a larger company? So what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, there were really multiple incarnations of content teams at Autodesk, and I'd been through various iterations of that. When I started, I helped found this very small business blog called Line Shape Space, and it was really focused on our it really was a blog because it was catering to the needs of, here's some advice about finance. You're in a small business, you're an architect, and you need to figure out like what's the difference between capex and opex, and all of these kinds of you run a business, you have to learn about all these different facets that you really maybe not wouldn't have anticipated.
Right.
So then in 2016, it evolved. It then expanded to all businesses of all sizes, and we rebranded it to be called Redshift. Because our CEO, Andrew Anagnost, felt like, okay, we're not just talking about lines and shapes and space anymore. So, and Redshift, by the way, is space terminology. He's a huge space nerd, so I was kind of catering to my audience on that one. And then finally, it rebranded the last time to Design and Make with Autodesk because we are focused on this category of design and make. So, yeah. Now, the latest incarnation of the content team was a really good mix of SEO, content operations, ABM and thought leadership research, content development, and content strategy. I think it was a great marriage, like a fusion of all of these different things. And I learned a lot from my peers at Autodesk. It was a wonderful ride to be able to experience all of that.
And I mean, when you come from a like from some, for someone like you, right, who's like a writer at heart, basically, right? You are a writer at heart. I mean, you've written for so many magazines. Uh, the right brain of the world is very active for you. That's more the creative thought process, right? But how do you learn to marry it with the left brain? That's more analytics and numbers. Because again, I mean, in any large company, content marketing is great to drive some means to an end, right?
Absolutely.
Just wanting to understand, how did that journey plan for you? Because I understood, right? You said you were a journalist, eventually turned into a marketer. You had no clue about what marketing looked like, right?
Yeah.
And in marketing, I think the equal part, I've seen the best of the marketers in the world have both right and brain working actively. So just trying to kind of get a sense, how did you learn that on the way?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely learning on the job because I have a very strong sense of intuition. I can make decisions very quickly, but data is really important.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to, I don't let go of my intuition. My gut has served me well, but also it's really important to tie the data in. And one thing that was in the last year or so really intriguing to me was, how do you take thought leadership, which, the main goal of thought leadership is build affinity for the brand. But then how do you also get it to convert? Because it is, it's at the beginning of the customer journey. So how does that work? To me, it's pulling this kind of red thread through a story so that, there are a lot of people who want to know, how is your product or solution going to help me? And how are other customers using it? How is it working well for them? But I think it's important to first tell the why part of the story before you connect to the how. And so there are a lot of really great opportunities in the thought leadership realm to capture the people who don't even know what problem they have yet. What is the solution that they're driving to? They don't even know yet. So if you open their eyes to like, hey, give them a sense of FOMO, this is where things are heading in the industry. And if you don't get on board, you might miss out. And of course, all of this starts with brand,
Right.
So brand, then to thought leadership, then to, more consider level, how, content, and so on till, a conversion. It is hard to tie thought leadership to conversion, but I think it is very, very possible. And we were kind of getting into that in the last few months, figuring out like, how do we contribute to assisted billings? Or we had something called the prospect metric, which would look at the action somebody takes. Are they downloading a report? Are they watching a video? Are they subscribing to our newsletter? Are they clicking on a CTA? And that they're inspired enough to continue on, and they might come back within. Assisted billings was kind of like within 30 days if they made a purchase, but they also looked at a piece of content you created. That it's doing its job.
And could you speak more about this entire design and make thing that you built at Autodesk, right? I mean, that's also an industry benchmark right now from a lens of building a content hub for B2B companies. A lot of people say that. I grew up in a family of a civil engineer. My sister is an architect. We've seen a lot of content coming up from Autodesk, and I'm just trying to kind of get a sense around how does a content hub property into a larger company like an Autodesk is ideated. I'm pretty sure it didn't become as successful as it is right now in the first year when you launched it, right? So how has that growth journey been? This would also help a lot of fellow marketers who kind of fear of taking those initiatives, particularly to build these branded come non-branded assets for your company, which eventually drive a lot of, like, those assets become like industry benchmarks to kind of read through about anything that you have, either from an education angle or from maybe a brand journalism angle in that case. But just love to hear on that.
So ideation. Okay, so ideas come from all over the place. Sometimes they come from one of our awesome writers who's just in the field and seeing something cool. I think we have been very intentional about the content we create in the last few years. And what that means is we're working with various teams, having partnerships with them and understanding, okay, what messaging are you trying to get across?
Right.
What are your goals? What do you want somebody to do as a result of consuming this piece of content?
Right.
And so we had a great partnership. Here's an example with the Impact and Foundation team for their sustainability content. We worked with them very regularly, and we would really hone in on what's important to you right now
Right.
for the business, right? And then what are our guardrails in terms of topics? Like, is it decarbonization? How far can we go?
Right.
Once you know that, actually, I think it affords you the opportunity to be really creative, because if you don't have guardrails, you're kind of like all over the place. But if you have these constraints, then you know where they are, and you can start thinking what is the hook? What is the really interesting story angle? So then you start talking, let's say, to a customer about what they're doing, and then you listen for those cues of something that feels kind of emotional. Right. Again, this is where my gut comes in, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. If I'm going to learn something new, then I'm assuming other people are going to learn something new too. So. Yeah. So that is how we partner with other teams. It's a lot of different internal partnerships, but also, we'll create trends pieces. So we did this piece on urban heat islands, and, talking to experts about that. It's just fascinating to learn about, what's happening in the world and being some small part of it.
In fact, I remember a piece of content. I don't remember if it was on Design and Make itself, but I remember a piece of content which said about how will the world look on moon, basically. And they wrote an entire piece. Autodesk had written an entire piece of content about how to build buildings around the moon, and they kept like a hackathon later on to kind of invite a lot of things, and it was super interesting.
Yeah.
But you said, right, you got to involve multiple teams around the board, and when you're running a content marketing function in an organization like Autodesk, right, you got to also deal with a lot of different industries that you've been a part of, like the company is a part of, right? On one front, you have manufacturing, then you have construction, then you have all the architecture and interior designers front, then you also have an entire 3D design studio, which is more the creative side of the world, right? So there are multiple industries and multiple personas you're already speaking to. How do you keep up with kind of knowing the knowledge base of each of them? I know 12 and a half years, anyone can do that by knowing it with context. But for someone, from internally, how do you keep up with all of these industries? Because they're so very changing rapidly around. So just want to get a sense.
Well, I think that any content creator or journalist worth their salt leads with curiosity. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that means just you are able to tell any kind of story. I kind of think of myself as like a polyglot of storytelling, because it doesn't really matter what the topic is. As long as I can go to a subject matter expert and learn from that person, I can demystify it. I can bring it to the world. And I think there are a lot of talented people out there who can do that. So, I've written about synthetic biology. I've written about, AI and film. It's, if it's striking my curiosity, then I'm not afraid to tell that story. And for Autodesk, because we serve, architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, film, TV, and games, What's interesting is there's a lot of convergence. For example, Walt Disney Imagineering uses all of our software, and for their theme parks, they use it
Right.
to design and build them, for the animatronics, for their digital media and animation. So it's not as like separated as one might think. However, what really helps is talking to like the industry experts within those, within Autodesk, and learning what is the messaging, what are we saying about digital twins right now? Like we want to be on the same page and saying what we should be saying about that, or generative AI, or whatever, emerging tech is a big feature of the content on Design and Make with Autodesk.
And also, how do you think about? I mean, this is not at Autodesk itself. In general, with your learnings across the board, right? How do you think about this multi-touch point content pieces that are to be driven? Like, I just believe like most companies know how to create great content. Maybe, I mean, I would be wrong to say most companies do that. Some companies know how to make great content, but I see most of those some companies that I'm speaking of, they would just create content as a one-off touch point for the consumer. So consumer comes in, takes in, and goes away, right? They might appreciate the piece of content as well, but that's not something that has kind of built a community for you in some sense, basically. And that happens if you have like a consistent content cadence with your customer at multi touch points with different points that they want over a period of time. And that's how that content to community to commerce is what I believe content marketing is at the end of it, right? How do you look at that? This also might be different for the larger enterprises in an ABM motion that you're running, and this might be very different for an SMB to individuals that you're actually selling to at companies like Autodesk in that case, right? How do you guys usually think about it?
I think of, for example, Design and Make with Autodesk as a publication. I think of it just like I did in the magazine days, because if you want people to keep coming back for more, and then you want them to be able to not just consume the piece of content and go away. You want them to continue on. Well, how did they use Fusion to do that? Here's another example. So we did this story. A guy by the name of Yasuo Matsunaka on my team, he's based in Tokyo, and he did a story with Honda about how they use generative design to create this, crankshaft.
Right.
Now, that story could have been just a cool thing, and that was interesting, but the account representatives, account execs for Suzuki saw this story at Autodesk, saw the story, and then also we could see that some of their competitors, Honda's competitors, were reading the story. Toyota, Denso, other companies.
Right.
So what happened is the sales exec took that story to Suzuki, and it inspired them. They wanted to figure out how they too could use generative design in their manufacturing. And so they ended up tripling their EBA with Autodesk. And so, those stories don't come about every day, but there are many opportunities for content to lead to something big.
Very interesting. And like for example, another part of this entire job that you've been always a part of is building the right teams to have the right benchmarks of content, right? I think the tougher part is of course to like hiring a team is tough, but the part that is even tougher is basically one, training the team, especially in a complex product ecosystem and an ever evolving world like you guys. And on the other front, it's also about making the team have the right benchmarks that also keep on evolving time to time with so many new things happening in the industry. How have you looked at that? One, how do you look at the new talent you're hiring? Second, how do you also look at uh, ramping that talent up internally in organizations? Would love to just get a sense, because I hear a lot of people wanting to hire content marketers. They say it's like a hit rate, it's a 50-50. One out of every two people who come in are good, they're bad. Some that you might feel are good in the first 3 months might not turn out to be great in the next six, and then it's a tougher job, right? So just trying to kind of get a sense around this.
I think it was very, very fortunate. I had, with a team of 6, based in Germany, Japan, in the US, they all had different superpowers. So I can tell you the last two people I hired were SEO writers because we were trying to really crank out a lot of these search landing pages to bring more traffic,
Right.
organic traffic to autodesk.com. One person I found, when the opening, when the job rec was opened, there were, maybe hundreds of applicants. Now it's like even crazier than that. But at the time there were hundreds. And I was just looking for I went through everybody. Like I myself, even the recruiter was helping me, but I just went through everybody. And I found this guy. And it just something, like I said about leading with curiosity, that was it for me. Like if he was so curious and he had done some good work and his writing was great, I could see his growth potential because he was just going to keep eating it all up, like soaking it up like a sponge. And he did. So
It's also a trait of a journalist.
yes,
This is like a big trait of the journalist.
Yes.
Generally, yeah.
yeah. And, not everybody on my team came from the world of journalism. Some came more from the marketing side.
Right.
And that was a good balance too. But we all kind of fed off of each other. And, I made sure that, with one person focused on, the APJ markets, in specifically Japan, China, Korea, and all the English-speaking India markets, and somebody focusing on EMEA and somebody focusing on the US. I also wanted the other people on my team to help kind of fuel, like,
Yeah.
help each other, lean on each other. It was a really good dynamic.
Interesting. And I mean, just trying to kind of get a sense, right? Again, team is another part, but there's another part of entire governance angle in larger companies, right? Because in these companies, one part of your job is definitely doing your job. The second part of your job is also convincing everyone. It's also convincing your compliance. It's also convincing your legal teams. Convincing in the sense there's a lot of part of managerial positions that you kind of do on your job than just doing great content, right? And that is very different from some company which is much smaller in nature. And if I'm just looking at very enterprise setups particularly, right, how do you learn that on the go? Because when you come into a role, you don't know all of these things particularly, right? And like what percentage of your time actually went into doing that?
I think what helped me the most in such a huge matrixed organization was building relationships and building trust with people, getting to know them, on a personal level, getting to understand, like, how can we work together? How can I help you?
Yeah.
And so I had great relationships within legal, within finance, and really all of the organizations. There were opportunities to create content, even within our CIO organization. There was a woman who came to me with an idea about how do we create sustainable data centers for the growth of AI. So for me, I listen, I ask questions, I just really get to know people, and it's worked well.
You've also gotten a chance to interview, I think, the Secretary of the State when President Obama was leading the charter, right? I'd love to understand how was that experience like for you.
So yes, for transportation, Anthony Fox is his name.
Could you tell us more about the story of how it turned out to be? I mean, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, it was really, really cool to talk to him about. It kind of went back into history about transportation and redlining and understanding politics, and it got really juicy and interesting, and I just I really enjoyed talking to people.
Did you do this as a part of Autodesk?
Yes.
Oh, nice. And was this like a part of Design and Make?
Yes. Yeah. At the time, it was called Redshift. The publication.
Next question that comes along with, if I were to give you a blank canvas today and ask you what would your content marketing stack look like in terms of people, in terms of technology partially, in terms of the strategy that you build in, how would you structure that?
Oh, if I'm starting from scratch
If you're starting from scratch today in an enterprise company,
in an
okay,
enterprise company. Yep.
how would you structure that
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I will say the way we had content development operations, SEO, all of these things and strategy together was super helpful to be like close in the same organization. It would have been really great to have social media because they were kind of like in a different orbit and we worked closely with them, but to have them as part of that
Yeah.
would have been awesome. And then also, we didn't have much control over activating the content and promoting the content in terms of through campaigns. And we had a lot of back and forth with various people and other teams about it. But to pull that closer in, I think would be really helpful because then you can, you're thinking through the entire process, this whole kind of feedback loop of planning, developing, publishing, optimizing the content after it's been published. Because we would,
Right.
something that published 3 years ago, we might completely do a rewrite, but capture that keyword and reuse it. So to me, having those components closer together would be ideal.
Would be ideal. Yeah, makes sense. Let you wear your AI hat now. I
Okay.
move on to the AI side of questions, right? Super generic question to begin with. AI is a buzzword in the industry right now. Everyone says they are some part of an AI company or they do use AI. But in larger organizations, I'm not seeing a lot of usage of AI. I mean, people have either built their own GPTs and they've built their own custom tools internally. But if you really ask the core executor at the ground, they don't really love it because it doesn't solve one problem. And I'm of the firm believer that AI is of no use unless it's a part of your workflows. I mean, it got to solve some problem for you. It cannot just solve the problem of creativity for anyone, right? It got to solve a problem, meaningful problem. I mean, creativity, of course, the chat GPTs of the world can solve, right? How are you looking that in the content angle? Of course, I'm not asking you exactly about how you're using it in Autodesk right now. That will come in a follow-up from me. But in general, how you're viewing at it from an enterprise angle towards the use of AI in content marketing.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated with AI. I'm actually starting a program tomorrow with Berkeley Haas that will focus on AI because I want to know what are the use cases now? What will it be able to do in the future? What are the ethics behind it? Like, can I make my own app? Like, I'm fascinated with all of it. There are things that I have really enjoyed using Gen AI for, and things that it's still failing pretty miserably at. So, but I expect these things to get better, and I'm excited about the opportunities because, for me, storytelling is it's a muscle, and it's something that like, for example, I'm not a coder. I have no business like overseeing people who are coding, software. I'm not an engineer. But as a content creator, I feel that I'm the right person, the right kind of person to work on using Gen AI in content because, one, because I'm curious, and two, because I am skeptical. And I fact check everything and I research everything really, really, like, like I said, there's a lot of rigor behind what we do. So anything that could make it faster, make like us, allow us to create more content, better content, is a good thing. And I'm excited about that. I mean, I think a good example or an analogy is, there are a lot of architects these days who are starting to use AI, and some of them have been afraid, like, is this going to take my job? I mean, that's the age-old question, is it going to take my job? Yeah. And the thing is, and this is something that the CEO and I have talked about before at Autodesk, architects, using AI, it may mean fewer architects on a project, but it means more projects that they can do ultimately. So, more revenue, there are more opportunities. I mean, I don't know how we're not there. But when I interviewed the SVP of research at Autodesk about AI, he said, "Yeah, the AI of today in 10 years is going to look like a toy. You could ride the wave."
Yeah. and generally, I mean, how are you also looking at AI to not create the content, but also augment the process of content creation. Because when you got to create, like I tell you what, at Pepper Content we say every company is a content company. So if you just break down the entire supply chain of content, which includes everything from a keyword research for SEO content to even the analytics part of content to even checking if the content has the right facts to even checking if the content is done grammatically well. Imagine all the job of an editor that used to happen just after writing for the grammar checks, plagiarism, etc. Everything from even the blank page problem of starting to think about what to write in terms of content. Usually there are so many jobs to be done when it comes to the process of content creation. I think people focus too much on just using AI to create the core content, but I think there are so many other tasks that can be automated using AI, and if that is done successfully, still I just feel like people would still be successful. What do you think about it?
There's a lot to unpack there. I feel pretty strongly that AI is a great assistant, can help give us more time to be creative. Because if I'm stuck doing something repetitive and boring for many, many hours, I start to get jittery and annoyed. And there have been a couple use cases with Gen AI that have saved me many hours and hours and hours of time. I don't think you can't really replace editors. Like, and
You
sure,
cannot. It's gonna be a human plus AI
it's all
world.
exactly. I mean, the grammar. Yes, Gen AI is great at grammar. I know there's a lot of talk about M dashes. Like I'm never going to stop writing using M dashes. There are a lot of ways that can augment our process, and I think especially with analytics, with workflow, with research, SEO outlines, all of that is great. And, I've used it to help me come up with a synopsis for a story, and I ended up rewriting it. But there's tons of, it's like having somebody to bounce ideas off of. And I really appreciate that. It's not going to write my drafts. Like maybe it will at some point. I don't know. I'm open, but
Not right now.
there's too much, in telling a story. I'll give you an example. So there's this civil engineering construction firm in Colombia. We did a story with them, and there was a lot of back and forth about the story with the owner of the project, with the civil engineering firm, with the sales exec at Autodesk, with our editors. There was so much back and forth about it. Like, AI is not going to solve all that. Like, there's too much human interaction to make that story right. And but I can give you an example of something that was really fun, that saved me the most time. So we were migrating our site from Design and Make with Autodesk from we migrated from WordPress, then to Uberflip, and then we had to migrate it to I think it's called Contentful, and to the Autodesk.com main domain. So in order to do that, we had we retired some content, and then we had about 750 pieces that we were going to migrate over. But each piece needed 3 pieces of recommended content to go with it. And we didn't have the machine learning in place to do that for us. So can you imagine how much time that you have to get intimately aware with each story and like what's going to be,
Interlinking
go really
with
well
it.
with it? Because you want people to be, they read something about generative design and then, maybe be enticed to read something else. So what I did is I took a spreadsheet with all of those URLs, and they had columns in them with tagging and like meta descriptions. And I put it in something called Julius AI and uploaded the Excel spreadsheet and asked it, please look through. I don't know why I'm so polite with Gen AI, but I'm afraid like it's going to hurt me. But the columns, please look through these columns, ingest that information, and then create 3 new columns for me with URLs for each piece of content that and it wasn't perfect, but it took me 4 or 5 hours as opposed to like the untold amount of hours that it would have taken otherwise. And that's what I mean. Like, anything that
Those
allows
are the jobs to be done I was speaking about. There's so many parts where you can
So many.
augment the speed of humans.
Yeah.
I also believe it's like how Grammarly worked in the world. When Grammarly came for the first time, I believe every editor in the world thought their jobs are gone. And if you see now, Grammarly is the best friend of every editor. It's a similar way to kind of look at it. I just believe Gen AI is going to do the same to writers, where eventually it will become an augmentation tool for writers rather than just kind of the fear of taking their jobs away. But I just believe the fact, again, it would be foolish of us to say that it's not going to take jobs. It is
It's
going
gonna
to
take
take
jobs.
some jobs, but those are the people who got to kind of find to like, it's not going to replace humans, it's going to replace humans who don't know how to use AI. So those people got to find to do something better with their jobs, definitely, because if your job is redundant and machine can do it, then you got to do it, you're made for something
That is
better.
exactly why about a year ago, my team and I, we hosted some Gen AI training. We tried to learn about prompts. We wanted to get in on the ground floor because, yeah, nobody wants to be left behind. I mean, there have been many disruptions throughout time. Like when ATMs came, to the world, then like bank tellers suddenly found themselves out of jobs. But then it was cheaper to create new bank branches, and then there were more bank tellers. So it's undoubtedly going to take jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, the World Economic Forum says as much, that it's going to take millions of jobs, but then it's going to create
Millions of jobs
of
more.
other jobs and even more jobs than before. So just I just don't be afraid of it. Is what I think.
I think I'll go to the last question before I move to the fun part of the segment. Last question is again the cliche one. What do you give as advice to young content marketers who are trying to build a career? I'd like to put it in this way. What do you give as an advice to those people what not to do in their content marketing journeys? I mean, everyone says about what to do, and I think that's a pretty standard template, unless you have anything really, really awesome to say. But I would say what not to do is something a lot of people don't say that, right? So I'll ask you that way.
Well, I'm thinking of it in a kind of a philosophical way, because I've been thinking about what is the next chapter of my life going to look like, and I think it's really important, if you're a content marketer, that you're asking yourself, what gives me joy and what makes me feel fulfilled?
Right.
Because if you are not thinking about what gives you joy in your work, then you might find yourself just feeling, malaise and just not happy with the work. So
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, the biggest mistake is not thinking about what fuels you, because your work is going to be more inspirational. It's going to be better.
It's self-awareness about curiosity in some sense, you're saying.
It keeps coming back to that. Yeah. It's just what gives you, like, what makes you feel super excited and proud of your work.
What
Because
makes you feel super excited and proud of your work?
what makes me feel super excited and proud? Fascinating stories where I learned something totally new, often about space, but, but yeah, something that just gives me goosebumps. There's an emotional hook to it. There's something that makes me feel something. It feels meaningful.
Right.
Just because it's content marketing doesn't mean it isn't a great story. It doesn't have meaning.
This was a good conversation. I mean, I've just delved deeper into your role and what you've done, but I think it all adds up to the 12 and a half years you have spent at Autodesk. So it does add up to that. Cool. The last segment of the show is usually we do a rapid fire.
Okay.
You got again 5 to 7 seconds to answer the question.
Okay.
Right?
Pressure's on.
Simpler questions, whatever on the top of the mind, just speak it out.
Okay.
I think that's the easier way to do it.
Okay.
If you were to be left on an island for one day and you got 3 options: a favorite album, your comfort food, and one software to live with, what would those 3 things be?
Oh my God. Okay, so my favorite album, Cocteau Twins, Heaven or Las Vegas. My favorite food, I'm a Minnesota girl, steak and potatoes with mushrooms. And
Is that a very Minnesota thing? I've heard a lot of people say that.
meat and potatoes kind of girl. Yeah. And then my last thing, what was it again?
The one software you want to
software.
live with.
Oh boy, that's really tough. Pro Tools,
Pro
so I could
Tools?
record.
Okay. Yeah.
Music.
Nice. Smart. Best place that you've ever traveled for work? I know I've seen one of your greatest work experiences of driving like you flew, right? If I'm not wrong, basically. I'm just trying to understand the favorite work experience trip that you've had.
Okay, favorite work trip.
Work trip. And the craziest experience apart from the work that you did on the trip.
The craziest experience on the work trip. I don't know if it's crazy. I went to the UK. I went to Birmingham to do some panel moderation, and I got really lost. I just was walking around Birmingham by myself forever. So I don't know if that's crazy, but yeah, I got super lost.
You got lost on a work trip.
Yeah, super lost. I mean, it's a pretty big city.
Yeah.
But, and it's weird because like I have GPS and yet I still got super lost. So I don't know what that's about. I'm sure there's crazy stories that I'm just like, it's not coming to my mind.
Okay. What's more difficult? Creating an album from grounds up or creating a content marketing team from grounds up?
Oh, I think the album, because what's in your head is never going to come out, at least for me, might not come out. You're like you picturing what, imagining the sound and what it looks like and what it feels like. And the ideas in your head are very hard to translate into the actual product. So like I never happy with how anything has turned out, but the process is probably the best part.
Best part of it, right? Says the musician and you. Next one, if you were to kind of switch your roles with content marketing into some other role at Autodesk, what would those roles be?
What would that role be? I would love to work for the research team again, because they're like on the bleeding edge of technology and studying, really fascinating things, doing research, writing research reports,
Studying space.
Of course. I'm in.
Yeah. Another one for you is, say, for example, what is that one thing that you would want to do had you started your career again now?
Oh boy, you're killing me.
Go for it.
This is a tough one. If I was starting my career over again, it's hard to say.
Would you take the journalism role again? Would you take the marketer's role?
I might. So from a very early age, I knew I wanted to be a writer and I knew I wanted to make music. And I probably do it all over again, but better, because we're often our own worst critic. And so there are a lot of things I would do differently because, we learn from our failures. So if I had to go again, I'd just do a better job of all of it.
Any fictional character you would want to you would want to make the brand ambassador of Autodesk?
Fictional character as a brand ambassador of Autodesk. Fictional character. Ooh. Okay. Maybe Spider-Man from the Across the Spider-Verse.
I get where you're coming from. Yeah, nice.
Super cool.
Even I thought that for the same one. So yeah, something similar one. And the last one, right? What is your favorite brand apart from Autodesk, and why do you like it?
This is going to be so obvious, but I've been an Apple lover since I was 10. Again, dating myself here, but I had an Apple IIe, and with like 8 megabytes of RAM. I just love it. I love the company. I love like the sleek sophistication. Yeah, maybe it's like sophistication.
Sophistication and Apple. That's fantastic. I think thank you so much for being such a sport, Kylee. Thank you for spending that time and helping us go as deep as I want. I know I was like too particular about some questions that I really, really wanted to go deep into, but I hope you had fun.
I had a great time.
Super. Thank you so much. It was great shooting with you. Thank you.